Okay, I will do that. And totally likewise, the prep with you, Kristina, was amazing. Really, really fun and enjoyable. And I think this conversation will be too. My name is Jorma. I'm a German living in the Netherlands for about 20 years. I'm an ex-ice hockey player, living and breathing media while being a father of four and a partner to one. And at Bose, I'm responsible for our global media campaigns, partnerships with the Mercedes Formula One team, Rugby Australia, and also really drive the global innovation of how we leverage MarTech and our first party data in the best possible way for our customer acquisition.
Fantastic, thanks. So, I mean, I think depending on what vertical you're working in, and depending on what your interaction at the consumer level looks like, consumer engagement can actually look very different from company to company. Can you provide a background or more insight into what does consumer engagement mean to Bose, and how are you measuring and looking at and analyzing that engagement today?
So totally can. And over the past approximate 10 years, we've worked really hard on first of all, understanding what consumer engagement is and also what it means for us. In a nutshell, it is for me in advertising and in media to start a relationship. I measure, for example, ad engagement and how that drove traffic, site exploration, and cart rates. But beyond that, I want to develop the relationship, as I say, beyond the first date. So even if we've seen a straightforward customer journey immediately leads to a transaction, this cannot be the end of it. We do want to learn more to understand how we can deliver a better experience, translating the innovations that we create into emotions. And there's always room for improvement, upsell, cross-sell at every stage of the journey. So it's really exploring the ways how we can learn more from each other. And examples of that would be product ratings. They give us really great clues, the amount of comments that people leave on our social sites, or we do customer surveys to understand that. And the way and pace we respond on our social sites shows customers and potential new customers how honest we are and how we value their input, and it's really important. And that leads to our ambition to become very intimate with the consumer, sharing a lot from our side on what we stand for as a brand, what we stand out, where we want to improve, but also what we are looking to create in the future to really establish an ever closer connection. In turn, we aim to develop such a high level of trust that we can dive deeper into what really moves our customer and how that might change over the years and what she's looking for us at to deliver. And only then, we can really establish these true KPIs and assess whether or not we manage to deliver.
It's interesting. So, I mean, and the emotional part is, I see, especially with a brand like that that's connected so things in a personal environment about music and emotion. I can really see that. That must be, I think there's a lot of brands that have very tactical things that they can measure around upsell and engagement with the customer. But I'm assuming that emotion part is really hard to quantify. Are there ways that you're already doing that today? Or how do you get a deeper insight into that?
I just looked at LinkedIn, and whenever Kristina Prokop talks about a customer engagement conversation with anybody from Bose, there's people commenting in that and capitalize on love. It doesn't get any better than that, right?
kind of like the comment yesterday. I had to laugh with my friend Sonny, who
exactly
immediately when I posted said, oh, their flight headphones are the absolute best.
It's amazing. And beyond that, it's, on media, or when I engage with family, friends, and beyond that, we can really tackle that. We can really, measure the positivity in the commentary section, but also because we're a premium product, honestly, we have a certain price range. And when we fail to deliver, which occasionally happens, we see a different type of emotion responding to that. And we assess that, we take that into account in all sincerity and adapt our products or whatever it is people would like to see an improvement in to become better at that.
Yeah. And what is it's measurement is always a big part of all of us trying to put numbers behind and truly understand what the output is of all the investment that we're making. What do the capabilities of measurement for consumer engagement look like for you today? And maybe if you give everyone a little bit of insight into what tools you're using, any of the tactical things that you're doing to manage and measure consumer engagement.
I can. The kind of ideal way to measure that would simply allow me as a brand to understand how, where, and why someone engaged with me, and in turn to assess if that is what I wanted, and to see in the future what else I need to do to continuously deliver that level of engagement, the level of product satisfaction, and the kind of feedback that I need to become better. An example from the past on what we measured for a campaign launch, and that how we learned from that is a Bluetooth speaker, and we campaigned for it really heavily. But instead of seeing sales as we measure that, or add to cart rates, we saw that another product within our lineup benefited from the advertising, and we were able to track that consumer journey and how the engagement led to transactions. But back then, because it didn't lead to what we planned for, assessed that was a failure because we didn't see what we wanted. And so this type of engagement was very important because it also taught us to sometimes adapt the plans and to take the learnings not necessarily as failure, but as an input or a motivation or an impulse to drive certain things differently. So what it really taught us was that we needed to assess pricings across our portfolio, because that was one factor. Design and color specifics. We can, with a certain type of consumer, we can create any type of color for our products to drive eyeballs, a pink headset, a turquoise one, or a bright blue one, or a purple one. But when customers go to our site, the sales talk a different language, because black is more future proof. That trend setting colors in fashion, they might change. Black is always pretty safe choice.
Interesting. I think you bring up a good point. So your role is global. So you are looking at the span of both the North American markets as well as international. Are there differences that you see in the markets in terms of, even for some of the same products, how consumers interact?
Great differences. Good question. I think depending on the platform, the messages, and the products and questions, there's so many different factors. But what I would like to hone in is there's regional differences when it comes to product specifics and how we need to take those into account in order to engage with the consumer. What one time I observed when strolling the streets of London was that when you look at especially the younger population, they were wearing headsets that the cup size, I thought, was trying to become equal to or bigger than tractor tires. It was gigantic, seriously. And this is hilarious, but at the same time, it's a rationale we found, simply that the trend is based on the visual association of size to performance or size to value, right? Bigger is always better because it's more.
Yeah.
But when walking through the streets of Tokyo, you saw a completely different picture. People the same age, probably wearing somewhat of the same fashion, so you can cluster them in the same kind of area. They weren't wearing big cup sizes in terms of the headphones, but they were wearing in-ear headphones, and not necessarily as a trendsetter, because nowadays we see that a lot of that is picking up in Europe and other parts of the world as well. But it's more of coming from a cultural standpoint that people don't want to visually invade other people's privacy. So instead of putting all of that into your face, there's tiny little earbuds, still you can enjoy your music while you're commuting. And that is really substantial, because taking another product into account, a TV speaker, well, we appreciate the bass of it because the bass delivers the strength of the sound. Again, Japanese people wouldn't like to do that, or at least the ones that we questioned and observed, because when you turn up the speaker, there's a certain value perception in different regions of the world of how many people can actually hear your content, whether they're intended to listen to it or not. So while we think gigantic bass, a lot of people can hear it, awesome. There's parts of the world that say, well, I don't want you to have to listen to my content. I don't want to invade your privacy. So I'd rather, when turning it up, I'd like to have the highs and, come more crisper and clearer sounds. So it's kind of
Fascinating.
same product or same product category, different attributes, and how you translate those into your communication to elicit the type of engagement leading to a transaction that you want.
Fascinating. But it's one of those things that when you hear it, you think it makes total sense. But when you're looking at, planning things out, is not necessarily the first thing that would pop to mind.
That's it. Really
Yeah.
it. Allow me to put you in the spotlight once, okay? Because
Sure.
I have to be honest, I would love to hear from Eyeota how you operate in this space. And maybe you can teach me what's your secret to success, what would be your best advice, especially since we're going into a cookieless future and I want to understand how to best measure engagement. And also, what would you really like to learn more of next?
Yeah, it's thanks for the question. It's, for us, Eyeota is a data only company. We're focused on data solutions and services for brands to better understand their consumers and in more intelligent ways and scalable ways to use their first party data. So the role that we play is really helping understand more about what you don't know about those consumers that can help you round out the picture and understand what makes these different types of consumers tick.
Yeah.
Because first party data is gold. Obviously, there's no question about that. But I think the reality is there are very few brands that have a deep enough first party data set to get a full picture. And so what becomes powerful, and that's something that we're very excited about, is helping brands understand more about their consumers. So that's where we're focused in this environment. Yeah. Now, to the future, I think as we see, it feels like every other day you read a new headline with a new update or change about, is Google going to do this or not do this, or is Apple going to do this or not do this, and what it means for I have to admit, it's challenging enough for me as a professional in this industry, directly in the technology environment, to follow all of this in as much detail as possible. I cannot imagine what it must be like for a brand sitting on, not in the depths of what we do and all the intricacies that power this ecosystem. I can't imagine how frustrating it would be to not really get a clear picture of where things are going. So and the reality is we don't know 100% yet, and we all have to be okay with that. So my advice would really be to find partners that can help you understand what's going on and can help you test. I think really that's how we also see it. Even, it's not like budgets have completely moved over to new IDs and this and that. This is very much a learning phase for all of us. So my biggest piece of advice is just be extremely curious, ask a lot of questions, and take the time to try stuff out, because there'll be it's not like one thing is going to solve all of our problems. It will be a combination of different strategies and different types of channels. So testing, and digging for information, and find the people that can help explain things to you in a way that you can understand it and translate that into your day-to-day work. So I don't have the silver bullet, but we'll all work very hard to get there. Yeah.
It's looking good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. One thing I thought, I have to say, I was very jealous about when you're telling me bits about your role, was how part of that is really looking at new innovative channels. And I love the term you gave yourself as a self-described innovation hunter. For when it comes to communication forms and new channels to reach consumers. So just love to hear a little bit more about, how do you do that hunting? Where do you get those ideas, and how do you allocate resources and budget to testing these environments? Because obviously there's an explosion of new channels, there's an explosion of new ways to reach consumers. So it's really important, but I guess that balance of how do you continue doing what you're doing, which is the well-oiled machine, but continue to look towards the future?
Right now and right here is where I hunt. I'm a strong believer of creating new and real relationships on a frequent basis and maintain these. The question I just asked was sincerely meant to allow me to learn from you. Every conversation from now on, or every conversation I have in this context, will now be richer because of what I learned today, because of you. And in that, in turn, will lead me to learn more in future conversations. And what does that? In that way, I set myself up to dig deeper for innovations and what's underneath it. I find areas where I need to learn more as a brand, and I identify the innovations that allow me to do exactly that. I think fail fast and cheap is the mantra here. And when I find one of those, I spend a small amount, maybe 10% of the overall plan is dedicated in the communication area to these innovative ideas, to see if that does what I needed to do, what the learnings are I can derive from that. And in case it really works, I can scale it. And if not, I can dump it. And there are a few that really amaze me in that context. Ogre, for example, is a company that really allowed me to see the full mobile consumer journey, what consumers did before they went to our site or to our app, and what they did beyond that, and thereby assess what other apps they might have, where I can target these prospective clients, in what way, if I can classify them as frequent travelers because they have 4 or 5 airline apps on their mobile device, and it's all GDPR conform. So this is not an advertising, but this is also kind of expressing my passion for, we need to assess customer privacy and we need to adhere to it. And everything I want to do is really kind of taking that into account to allow the consumer to choose whether or not he would like us as a brand know as much about her as we do or intend to.
Thanks. And going back to the data point, what, as a brand, what type of data feeds into your strategies? What kind of, and I know one of the biggest challenges for brands right now is boosting up the amount of data that they have in-house, the amount of first-party data they have. So can you give us a little bit of insight into what are those data, what are the data points that you have access to as a brand that feed into the measurement of your consumer engagement?
Again, so there's this upper funnel part, right, where I really want to see the ad engagement, how that leads to traffic, what else I need to do in terms of messaging and platforms, and deliver the content that the consumer would like to have, when and where, and how that drives to traffic on my site. The data that feeds into my strategy is from a first party perspective, is the sales data that we can generate, audience data, points that allow us to read the different demographics, different regions, also the sales cycles that certain products have, and where we can intercept a new and potential client and redirect to other products, upsell, cross-sell, manage to cluster the different cart values or different customer types to different cart values, and the customer value over a lifetime, customer engagement frequency, and what channels they engage with us, so social, digital, mobile, retail. And as you say, I think this is a really good point. Our first party data is gold, but it's comparatively small. So we also need to assess opportunities, how we can scale that.
Yeah. And, earlier you said something interesting about not only looking at the customer, like, the consumers that you already have and how you upsell them, but also the prospecting. So is that, looking also at the engagement at a level where where at the upper funnel. So that's very much part of the focus. I mean, do you have is there a breakdown of how much you guys focus on upper funnel versus consumer engagement versus lower funnel?
So in terms of spend?
In terms of spend, yeah.
Yeah. Certainly we need to drive the upper funnel, because at the end of the day, if we just focus on harvesting the lower hanging fruit and measuring the data of that, we'll kind of start to optimize towards nothing, right? If we don't keep feeding the funnel.
Yeah.
There's roughly a kind of an upper funnel versus activation split of 60-40. I think that's a healthy thing. It's following not only our experience, but benchmarks across different industries. And so it allows us to continuously hunt for new input, because new customers mean new input. And when they follow down the funnel and become first party data, they also allow us to assess that and understand how they engaged with what and when, and how we can then in turn leverage different types of technology, as you say, to create lookalike audiences, clones, and drive efficiencies based on first party data, based on the lower funnel into the upper funnel part.
Interesting. So when when the other thing I wanted to talk a bit about today, and I realize we only have about 5 minutes left. Oh. But if we look at what's been happening in the industry, brands are really trying to get their skill sets up in-house, and some are depending on agencies or external. So I have, I was very curious to hear when you look at building up these capabilities in-house versus using external partners, how much of that intelligence and data kind of strategy that runs all of the measurement of this consumer engagement sits in-house versus out of house, and how do you think that might change over the next over the next year or so?
Awesome question. I think right now I can't give exact numbers, but I think there's a considerable amount of data sitting outside of our company, because taking advertising efforts, right, pushing advertising spend into different publishers and different channels provides them with a decent amount of learnings. But the more we understand that, and the more we learned over the years what the value of that is, the more aware we became of the fact that we needed to kind of also not necessarily protect us, but increase the value that we derive from our activities by in-housing some of that. So when it comes to the advertising data, we are ever more eager to take that on board. And at the same time, the kind of bottom line, the first party data is something that we've always kept in-house. We do have parties that we work with in order to cluster certain parts of the audiences or cluster them in specific ways, and then leverage data and technology platforms to push messaging out. But there's ever more focus on increasing the percentage. We'll never get to 100%, and I don't think that will ever be the aim of it. But we are very aware of of the value of it, and we are intending to take a larger chunk for us on that.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I would imagine it's one of those things. Everyone knows the importance of it, but actually finding those people who you can bring in house and run that and building teams around it is a big investment, and and a challenge. So we've talked a lot about measurement and ways of following the consumer engagement. The one thing we haven't touched on yet are channels. This must also be another big challenge for you. Not that you don't have enough. But the explosion of different channels that you can reach consumers on over the last couple of years, how have you been able to handle that, and how do you manage testing and learning from all these new channels? Is it similar to that 10%? Does that also do those new channels fall into that kind of testing budget you were talking about, or do you handle that differently?
They fall into that. We need to have dedicated resources also to assess these different types of new and up and coming channels, to allow for us measuring what we can measure, because not all new channels enable us to measure them in the same way that we have existings. But we need to kind of find a consistent structure of managing that, and consistent KPIs and identifiers to understand, has this worked or not. And so, we're definitely dedicating resources to that. We're keeping that in the same and similar type of structure, but it's also a continuous flow. And in a way, Dr. Bose created this company for all of us, no matter where we sit in the company, to be innovation drivers. So it's not like the innovation team does the innovation for products and the other innovation team does it for communication design and whatnot. It's all kind of intrinsic to it. And so we work always with an eye on and with dedicating time of our jobs onto that. So I have an analytics team that helps me measuring that and understanding that. And as much as they analyze existing campaigns, focusing on media channels that we know drive sales and revenue, they also dedicate some time to measuring the success or the lack of these innovation platforms.
Thanks. And that's, and if you look at all the channels that you've been looking at over, over the last, I don't know, we don't have to define a time period, but let's say the last year and a half.
Ages.
Are there ages? Well, I would just mean, well, I guess we could put this question back further, but when you've been evaluating all these new channels, are there any that you've seen as the most promising new channel, and also, is there anything you say you don't know if it's going to be the most promising, but it's just the coolest?
This, as you say, there's so much development in that. As long as it's any development consistency with GDPR is, from my perspective, is cool. Because only then.
Okay, wait. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I will. I will have everyone write this down in the books. I don't think I have ever heard the word "cool" associated or inserted in association with GDPR. But I like it.
It's a hurdle, but there's an information asymmetry out there, and simply ripping all that data from customers without asking consent or without creating an awareness of what's actually being done with it is, in my mind, uncool. But there's another kind of thing that I really liked on the advertising side, and it's not necessarily a platform, but it's a company that well, they're called Good Loop. And basically what they do is they serve ads for brands, and while they're doing it, they raise money for a good cause that a brand can choose from. So, especially in this kind of ever tech development, advertising has received, I think, a very negative connotation because it's always in your face, and sometimes it even measures data that I don't, as a consumer, want to be measured. But these guys they've saved lives. They've donated money to various different good and beneficial funds that I think adds to the industry as a whole to give them a more positive reputation. Yeah. And as a company really stands out because it's a win-win. So the engagement the customer shows is increased by this choice of consumers telling a brand to provide money to a certain good cause. And then there's a third win in that, because this good cause and the people tied to it receive funds to receive meals or better care, better attention. And I really like that development. That's great. That's really great. I'm not aware of it, but I'm sure I, as well as many others, will have a look at it very, very quickly. It's not an ad, it's just to say they're really good. I believe you. But it's also nice to see, in this world where so many companies get focused on only on their profits and driving their own interests. It's really encouraging to see stuff like that. So what I'd love to do, there are a couple questions that came up from the Q&A sessions. I'd love to bring a couple of those up up right now. And if anybody's listening does have another question, we will have a couple of minutes to run through those. So one of the questions that came in is, does innovation need to be big scale, so epic, unthought of, or can it be incremental innovation and just as game changing? Okay, I'll try to understand it in the right way and put it into context. So I think epic innovation would be, and to put that onto our brand, right, a little bit of advertising, is noise cancellation. Nobody thought of it before Dr. Bose did. And what you can do now is you flip a switch and you zoom out of this airplane noise, and you can concentrate on the music you would like, the movie you would like, or whatever it is that you're doing and you derive passion from. I think that's epic. What might not be as epic is, and I'm just showing a little product, is this little silicone ear tip. right? It's a piece of plastic, and in essence is shaped in a really weird form. The innovation piece of this one, though, is enabling customers to not feel anything if you wear this product for 4 or 5 hours straight, while others, you might have some stuff tearing in your ear or lobes or whatever it is, and it might disturb you. So innovation doesn't have to be epic. Innovation just has to drive value, and whether you can see it or feel it, I don't think it needs to.
Yeah.
It just needs to drive value. We can still communicate about it, but we barely do.
Yeah. And something as small as that, how much of a, just out of curiosity, even like how when a change like that comes, and I don't know if you can give us insight into this, but if you look at the types of innovations that are trying to get pushed through a company with a product portfolio of that size, looking at the impact of these smaller ones versus these epic ones, how does somebody decide that silicon is really silicon change is really going to be a game changer, even though it's that small?
We need to ask customers. We need to try out. We need to kind of really flex it, and I hope it's not breaking live on camera now.
That would be perfect.
But in essence, I mean, there's so much, maybe not tangible, but we all know that creating sound in this size is weird, takes effort, probably a lot of research and a lot of knowledge. But this will never reach a customer if this one doesn't work. So there's a similar level of importance, because if I put this in my ear and have great sound, but after 5 minutes my ear starts pulsating and I really can't enjoy that, the whole thing goes into the bin. So we can't scale it, and we've got to bin it.
Yeah. Interesting. So the next question is, how has the customer journey evolved in recent years, and how have these changes in the customer journey impacted your approach to digital media?
Well, the first one is an interesting one, because the customer journey, let's say from a Bose perspective, the cycles went from being relatively long to really short. From a heritage perspective, we sold TV speakers of premium quality with a premium price attached to that, and the consideration levels, the amount of argumentation I'd have to go through that within my household is taking time. But now that we create somewhat smaller products, smaller prices, these cycles have really shortened. And in order to assess the right point in time of when somebody in this world digitally is raising a hand and thinks, I could use a headphone, to the purchase, has shrunken from weeks to days. And the flexibility that digital channels allow me to, both in shouting a message as well as understanding how that message is received, and the engagement, has really driven up digital investments. Also, and not last or least, because the point of purchase has moved continuously into the digital area.
Yeah. And I think we have time for one last question, and that will be, what has been your most successful marketing program?
The most successful marketing program? Oh, good one. There's a few, but what I really thought was outstanding is when we ventured into a space we haven't ever touched before, and that's sleep. Sound makes you run faster, punch harder, cycle better, drive faster in the car as well. Maybe not always good, but sound does something to you, right? The music that delivers it has a motivational kind of area, but sleep and sound was an area that we explored into, that we have never ventured into it. So we were talking about a completely new product, completely different type of consumer, and really assessing that with MarTech as an understanding when people would sleep, when they would have issues with sleeping, what types of apps they're using, and then taking those learnings and marketing that product. That was one of the biggest successes.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So thank you. I take it by Marina's
Showing up
appearance,
smiling face,
smiling face. That brings an end to our session.
sadly.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm sad. I mean, so many good nuggets there. GDPR is cool. I quite liked an early nugget, which was our job is to deliver more beyond the first date. And if I think about my dating experiences, they should get better and better. So I really like that metaphor. I thought that was great. I loved what you said, Kristina, which was when we think about the cookieless future, we're all kind of in a industry-wide learning phase, kind of unlearn what we learned, learn it again. I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, big thanks to both of you. Thank you, Jorma, and thank you, Kristina, for such a great session. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. It was fun.
Thank you very much. If
Take
there's
care.
any more questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or connect via LinkedIn.
Perfect.